Hi guys, welcome to section 3, front-end libraries. In this section we're going to look at Lodash, which is a standard library for JavaScript. We're going to look at moment.js, which is something you can use to help you with dates and date times for JavaScript. And then we're going to look at how to make HTTP calls using superagent, which is a library, and fetch, which is a new thing which has been built into the language. In this video we're going to look at Lodash. Lodash is like a standard library, but you can grab it from npm. Does JavaScript not have a standard library? And it kind of does. It has like a bunch of functions that are built in. Because of the history of JavaScript, the standard library inside JavaScript is a bit weak. They've been adding to over time and they've made it better. But one of the cool things that's happened as a result of it not being very good was that the community got together and they worked on a project called _JS and later Lodash.js, which is very similar. And basically they came up with what they thought it should be as a library. And that's pretty cool because it meant that, lots of different people had input and perhaps there were, I don't know the history, but perhaps there were more things competing, and all that competition of having different options has led to a really good standard library in Lodash. A lot of programming I do in JavaScript is really use Lodash almost in every file I write because it's just so sort of key to many things that you're doing. It's really good at data transformations. And it's particularly important if you're using something like React or Preact or Vue, you're going to probably get some data, want to transform it, and then put it on the screen. And Lodash is really good for that transforming phase. It's really useful. You can use it anywhere and everywhere, but I think that's where it really shines is like, you get some data from a HTTP request, you get the payload back, and then you think, oh, actually, I'd kind of like, this to be sorted, or I want it in a slightly different way. So I'm going to show you how you can use Lodash, do those sorts of things. I'm going to cover what Lodash is, the sorts of things it includes. I'm going to give you like my top sort of 10 different functions that I use that I think are useful, that if you were getting started with it, then that you should use. So the first place you want to go when you're getting started with Lodash is the docs. So if you just Google for Lodash, if I make that a bit bigger for you, Lodash docs, and then you go to lodash.com/docs, you can see the version of the library that you're reading the docs for. That's the same version we're going to be using today. And then inside the docs, you can see they've broken up the functionality into different bits. So you've got array, and then you've got all the different things you can do on arrays. Then you've got collections, dates. We're going to use moments more for dates. So there's only one function for dates. I don't know why they've included that. Functions, so stuff that helps you with functions. Lang, which is sort of mainly testing types, like is date, is Boolean, stuff like that. Math, certain maths things. Numbers, not much in there either. Objects, quite a few things in objects. And then some sort of chaining and sequencing. Some string stuff, which is pretty good. But there's another library I like to use for some more advanced string stuff, which is called string.js, which we won't cover in this course. But if you think there's a function that should exist, which doesn't exist in here, check out string.js and it's probably there. And then util, that's pretty much it. So this is going to be a key place for you to kind of refer back to find, how these things work. You've got examples of like, here's how you do a chunk, for example. Really useful. I still visit here quite regularly. Cool. Let's start off by getting Lodash added to our project. Okay, so what we've got here is the section 3 libraries examples code base. It's got a package.json file with some neutrino set up. Pretty boring. There's not a lot going on. So let's go ahead and install Lodash. So to do that, we say npm install Lodash. Should be familiar with this by now. npm will go away. It's installed it, great. So then if we jump back to the code, we can see that Lodash is now a dependency in here, so that's fantastic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file in here. I'm going to call it lodashexamples.js. Save that in the source directory. Cool, so that's where we're going to put our examples. I'm going to import that file, import Lodash examples from the index.js file. So I've just imported it. I've not actually done a left-hand side or a from. That will just load this file and run whatever code's in it. So in here, the first thing we're going to do is import underscore from. So the reason it's called Lodash is because this is a Lodash or an underscore. The original library was called underscore, and then they obviously had to come up with another name. So that was Lodash. And let's just check that this is all working. Hello Lodash. So we're just going to log that out. Let's run this and check it works in the browser. Run neutrino. And if we load this page, hello Lodash. So we're in business. So let's get started. So First of all, I'm going to just do something really simple, which is print a random number between 1 and 100. So you've got the Lodash _.random between 1 and 100. I'm going to console log that. Let's see what that does. Easy starter. 24, refresh again, 17, 51. Different answers every time. So that's working. So let's look at some more interesting examples. So first of all, I'm going to create some data. So I've got const dogs is an array, and then it's got an array of objects. The first one has a name of Jazz and an age of 4. Next one is Mr. Ruffles. It's got an age of 10. And then Edgar, who's got an age of 5. So we've got dogs, and now what I'm going to do is a map. So let's have a look at this code. So really the bit you need to look at is the bit that I've highlighted here inside the brackets. So _.map on dogs. Then we're passing a lambda with an arrow dog.name. So what map does is it takes an array, or an object I think, and then you provide a lambda. This lambda gets run for each item in the array. So each of these will get passed in one at a time into here, and whatever this function returns, that's what ends up in the array in that index. So for example, when you pass this in, it's going to return Jazz as a string. So then the first thing in the new array we get back is Jazz. So let's see that running. So you can see we've got an array of Jazz, Mr. Ruffles, and Edgar. So we've sort of mapped to their names. It's a bit of a poor word. It's a standard word and it is pretty widely used, but in terms of English, it's not brilliant. Okay, so that's mapping. So a map, I like to think about a lot of these functions in terms of the types. So I would say if I was talking about map, I would say map takes an array or an object. So in this case, it takes an array of objects or dogs, but our dog here is an object, right? It's got keys and it's got values. And so it takes an array of objects, and then the lambda function here operates on just one of the items in that array. So in that case, it's a dog, which is an object, and then returns some other type. In this case, we've opted to return a string. And then what you get back is an array of the same length as the input. So there are 3 dogs here, so we'll get an array of 3 things back with the output of the lambda function for each thing being there in place. Now an interesting thing about that is you might be thinking, oh, it's replaced it in the original dogs array. So if we console log dogs as well and look at what's going on, so you can see here the dogs haven't actually changed. So nothing's changed in the original array. So why is that happening? So that happens because most functions in Lodash do not mutate the data which you pass in. Some of them do, they'll normally say that they do, but I would say it's like less than 5%. And this is generally considered to be quite a good way to operate because it makes things simpler to think about, and in general mutating stuff's a bad idea. That's a subjective statement, but I believe in it quite strongly. So yeah, map doesn't change dogs. It produces a new array that has the output of this function in each thing. So you're never going to check, you're never changing dogs. So that's map. Let's have a look at filter. So filter is similar to map. It's also a collections kind of operation, and it also can take an array or an object. So it's taking dogs here, and we also provide a lambda, which operates again on each individual dog. So it's quite similar. The difference is that whereas map always returns an output of the same length as the input, filter can return the same number or less. So it could return less. And the lambda's type is also different. So it takes a dog as input still, so you expect it to return true or false, so a boolean. So in this case I've said is dog.age greater than 7. So that'll either return true or false. If it's true, you keep it. If it's false, you lose it. So that we'll only end up with the dogs with an age greater than 7, which is Mr. Ruffles. So let's see that, but it's still an array. Let's see that working. See, we've got just Mr. Ruffles. That's filter. The inverse of a filter is reject, which works in exactly the same way, except for it keeps the things, it gets rid of the things which are true. So it's the inverse. So if we were to change that to a reject, you'll see we'll get the other 2 dogs. So it's the inverse. Next up, this is quite a useful one, sort by. This is something which I think I do quite a lot. So sort by dogs. So again, you're taking an array, and then again, a lambda. So these are the ones I use the most, I think, these sort of collection-y ones. So here we're saying sort the dogs. For each dog, sort by dog.age. What this will do, it will calculate the dog.age, so that'll be 4 here, 10, and 5. Depending on the dog, and it will sort them by those numbers. So you'll end up with hopefully Jazz, then Edgar, then Mr. Ruffles, because that's them sorted by their age. So let's see that working. Mr. Ruffles is last, Edgar, Jazz sorted by age. So that's really cool. You could obviously do that. You can do all of this stuff in like for loops by assigning variables, but it's often less code, it's more human readable because you're like, what's going on? I'm sorting by, what am I sorting by? Dog.age. It's easier to think about, and it doesn't mutate the original data. So dogs here will still be in the wrong order, but the sort by will return something. An interesting thing to notice as well though, if you're using something like sort by, realistically in real life, you need to assign it, because otherwise you lose the answer. And if you lose the answer, dogs won't have changed. So dogs will not change unless you assign it like this. So you need to assign a lot, almost all with all of these. I've logged them, but you're probably in real life going to want to say, const something and grab the answer. Next up, another collections one, find, pretty useful. It's kind of like a filter, except for it finds the first one which matches that's true, and the typing's a little different. So sort by has a similar typing system to filter and reject. So sort by says, takes an array of something, so in this case an array of dogs, or which are objects, you give it some sort of lambda, and it will return you an array of dogs which is the same length, potentially in a different order. Find takes an array of dogs in this case, each dog's an object still, takes a function which takes each of those, so it takes a dog or an object, and you return a boolean, so it's a bit like filter or reject. So you return a boolean, and it will return you the first one in the array that matches. So it doesn't return you an array like the others, it will just return you, in this case, a dog. So let's have a look at that. So we get Jazz back, because he's the one whose name matches Jazz. There's also find last, which will return you the last match. So next thing is keys. So keys operates on an object. So in this case, I've got the first dog, which will be Jazz, so he's an object. And we're saying, get me the keys. This will return an array of the keys. So that will be what, name and age. Next one, there are a ton of these. I'm not going to cover them all. This is, you probably saw when we were going through the list, there's probably over 100 functions in Lodash, and I don't know what all of them do, and some of them are quite complicated, but these are the ones I use most on a day-to-day basis when I'm programming. So first is the same as writing this. It's sort of the same. It has the same kind of result. One of the differences with it though is that first, if dogs is null, then dogs bracket 0 will cause an error. That's just how JavaScript works. First dogs is null safe. It will just return null. And I like that about Lodash. A lot of things are very null safe. Map's the same. If dog's null or reject, it will just return null, I think, or an empty array, which is great because oftentimes you're coding like React or something, you don't want it to blow up. It depends what you want. Maybe you want to explicitly handle that case, but in a lot of cases you're kind of like, sometimes it's null just when your program loads and the data comes in and then it's an array again. And rather than complaining, it will just kind of get on with it. I like Lodash for that, it's good. Let's just quickly check that this works. So I'm calling the first, and we get back Jazz, the first one. Great. We also have last, which works in exactly the same way. I won't show you that one, I'm sure you can imagine. So next up, we've got a cat. Mr. Tiddles, here he is. He's got a name of Mr. Tiddles, address, and then his address is actually another object which has a house number and a zip code. So what I'm going to show you now, let's say we wanted his house number. How do we get that out? So this is one way. So obviously what you could say is cat.address. That would work just fine. This code here is equivalent to that. So we're saying underscore.get cat, and then we're passing a string, and the string is basically this bit here. So we start off with underscore.get cat, and then we pass this string which says, we want to get address house number, and you can see it's actually the same as the original cat.address.house number. So the string is the same as this bit. Those two bits are the same. So what's good about this? Why use this over this? I mean, this is actually kind of clearer, right? And so in general, I would probably use this. If this bit got really long, like something dot something else, I don't know, whatever, then I would start thinking about using get. I mean, this one's already got 2, so I would start using like get. Why is that? It comes back to what I was just saying. Get is null safe. So if address is not on a cat for some reason, maybe you don't control this data, I don't know, like in this case, obviously address house number is always going to be there because we've got this line right here and we can look at it and go, yeah, that's fine. But let's say for some reason we weren't sure, maybe this was optional. But if address is missing, then cat.address will evaluate to undefined or null. And then you'll say like null or undefined, probably undefined.house number. And then that's a red console error, blows up your program. If you do it with .get, it's fine, it will just return null, which is probably what you wanted, right? So get's really useful for like just doing things in a null safe way. Let's quickly check it works. There's his house number, number 1, so that's good. So this syntax here, you can use that in a bunch of other things. So let me show you how you use it in the maps dog example. So instead of saying dog, so if you see this code here, dog arrow dog dot name, you can actually use the get syntax in a load of other functions, which is really useful as well. So you could even say like name dot something else. You can do that, that's fine. But you can say name, and it will do a get on each dog and do, dot get the dog and then pass in name. So it's actually really handy. Let's just show that that works. You can see the dog names are still here. So that's really cool. It's also shorter. Being shorter is quite a big benefit, I think. So that's cats. So next up, this is a slightly more advanced feature, but I think it's quite useful in real life. Chaining. So here we've gone back to dogs. We're doing a chain, _.chain on dogs. Then we do a dot map. Then we do a dot sum. So we're mapping to their ages using this technique, using the get technique to use a string. So we chain dogs, then we dot map, and then we dot sum. Let me show you that code without the chain. So it's _.map dogs age. And once we get the result of that, we're going to sum it. So that will give us an array of ages, like maybe, what is it, like 4, 10, 5 or something. And then we're going to pass that into sum. So we pass an array of 4, 10, 5 into sum, and sum will give us an answer, which will be, I think, maybe 19. So this line and this line are the same. But chain, the way chain works is it says you say what you want to chain, so dogs, and then you don't need to mention dogs in the map. So in the map, you just use the second argument. You don't need to say dogs again. And then whatever this produces will get passed inside the sum. Now the big advantage of this is just basically human readability, because this is backwards. To my mind, and I think most people's minds, you're thinking left to right. That's kind of how your brain works, right? It's how you read stuff and how you sort of grow up reading stuff. And then here what we're saying we're doing is a map and then a sum. That's the way that JavaScript will evaluate this, because this is in brackets. So we'll say _.map, and then once it gets a result, it will do the sum. But if you look at it as a human being, it looks like it's the other way around. So you're kind of like, oh, I'm doing a sum and then a map. That's a bit of a pain. With the chain, it stays the right way around. And that's basically it. So you start the chain, then you can call any Lodash functions you want, so like .map, .sum, and you just skip the first parameter to any of those functions, and they take the previous thing that happened. And then at the end, when you want to get the value back out, you say .value, open bracket, close bracket. And that's chaining. So the last one I'm going to show you is a function, one of the function helpers that Lodash has, so a throttle. So if I just quickly explain what a throttle is, and then I'll show you this example. So throttling, as the name sort of suggests, is when a function gets called an awful lot very quickly. It will only let it get called at most once per number of milliseconds. So here, the function we're passing in is console, it's a little lambda that just console.logs hello. And we're passing in 1,000 milliseconds. And so what that will do is this whole statement returns a function, which we've called say hello. So we can call that just like anything else, say hello. We can call that just like anything else, say hello. So it says hello, there you go. So nothing special there, still works the same as it did before. So now what we're going to do is we're going to call say hello 100 million times in a row. So to do that, I do an _.times 100 million, or big number here, and then the say hello function. So what will happen here is, because we've set 1,000 milliseconds as this parameter, this thing can only get called once, this function can only get called once every second. So if you call it over and over and over again really fast, it will just get called once every second, or once every 1,000 milliseconds. So let's see that in action. So if I refresh the page, see hello, hello, 2, 3, see lots more hellos popping up, this number goes up. And after about, well, I don't know how long it takes it to do 100 million, but in a second, you'll see it will stop. And it will have only printed maybe around 20 times. Let's see. So here we go. Cool, I think it's finished. Oh, one more. So it printed about once here, 21 times, so about 23 times. But it should have printed 100 million times. So, the throttle's done its job. There's another useful one called debounce, which is very similar, useful for UI stuff. Debounce is only run at the end. So if you call it 100 times in 1 second, it will only call it once at the end of that 1 second. That's useful for a lot of UI things. A lot of people used to use that with jQuery, I think. So in a nutshell, that's Lodash. There are a lot more functions. I suggest you maybe have a look and read through all the documentation of, like, I don't know, you could spend hours reading them. there are tons of different ones. I think in general, if a function's in here, I tend to use it from here because I think their implementation in general makes sense. And sometimes the one in JavaScript, I was reading the other day, there's a function in here, isNan. So isNan will give you the sensible answer that you're expecting in most cases. There is a function called isNan built into JavaScript, which if you give it the string A returns true, which makes absolutely no sense. So really what they're doing is they're smoothing over some of the rough edges of JavaScript with this library and then giving you sort of sane results for some of the things that are built in that are still a bit messed up. It becomes less valuable over time because they're fixing things like maps built into the language, filters built into the language, so you don't have to use the Lodash versions. I still use them a lot because I think the docs are better for Lodash than these docs are not perfect by any means. They're actually, I'm not the biggest fan, but they are better than I think the built-in, the best docs you have really are the Mozilla docs, which are pretty good, but I think these are slightly clearer. You've got a GitHub with issues. Lots of people use it, so you've got that critical mass of like being able to find help when you need it. Yeah, so I really recommend it. I think it's one of the most important tools that you'll use in JavaScript, and actually a lot of functionality you write will boil down to Lodash.